So we're picking up with these happy golden years, continuing on with these happy golden years, chapters 16 and 17, beginning with summer days. And I hope you've been enjoying this book. It's one of my it's one of my favorites, probably because I connect to it in a really nice way. It means a lot to me to have been a part of that. To be a personification of the story being told in this book is a really cool thing for me, and I've always felt that. And so it's just been an honor to get a chance to be with you on a July afternoon. And by the way, I hope everyone had a happy 4th of July. Wearing a red, white, and blue shirt today to celebrate America's birthday. So I hope you had a nice celebration. Hope you've been wherever you are. I hope you're safe and sound. It's a challenging time for everyone. So I hope this group is among those who are being very responsible about how they are behaving. As a country, we're really facing it, but I'll leave any further discussion of any inference of politics out of this. Let's continue on with summer days. Okay, here we go. It was such a joy to have Mary at home that the summer days were not long enough for all their pleasures. Listening to Mary's stories of her life in college, reading aloud to her, planning and sewing to put her clothes in order, and once more going with her for long walks in the late afternoon made the time go by too swiftly. One Saturday morning, Laura went to town to match Mary's last winter's best dress in silk to make a new collar and cuffs, and she found what she wanted in the new milliner's and dressmaker's shop. And while Miss Bell was wrapping the little package, she said to Laura, "I hear you're a good sewer. I wish you could come and help me. I'll pay you 50 cents a day from 7 o'clock to 5 if you'll bring your dinner." Laura looked around the pleasant new place with the pretty hats and 2 windows, bolts of ribbon in the glass showcase, and silks and velvets on the shelves behind it. There was a sewing machine with an unfinished dress lying across it, and another lay on a chair nearby. "You can see that there's more work here than I can do," Miss Bell said in her quiet voice. Miss Bell was a young woman, and Laura thought her handsome with her tall figure and dark hair and eyes. Laura decided that it would be pleasant to work with her. "I will come. If Ma's willing, I should," she promised. "Come Monday morning if you can," said Miss Bell. Laura left the shop and went up the street to the post office to mail a letter for Mary. There she met Mary Power, who was on her way to do an errand at the lumber yard. They had not seen each other since the buggy ride in early spring, and there was so much to talk about that Mary begged Laura to come with her. "All right, I will," said Laura. "I'd like to ask Mr. McKee how Mrs. McKee and Mattie are getting along anyway." They walked slowly, talking all the way up the street, across the cindery railroad tracks and the dusty street to the corner of the lumber yard where they stood talking. A yoke of oxen was coming slowly into town on the country road from the north, hauling a lumber wagon. A man walked beside the farther ox, and Laura idly watched him as he swung a long whip. The oxen trudged along until nearby to the corner and then started ahead quickly. Laura and Mary stepped back. The man commanded, "Whoa, ha!" But the oxen did not turn left. They swung to the right, around the corner. "Gee, then, go where you're a mind to," the driver ordered them impatiently, but joking. Then he looked at the girls, and they exclaimed together, "Almanzo Wilder!" He raised his hat with a cheerful flourish to them and hurried along the street with the oxen. "I didn't know him without his horses," Laura laughed. "And the way he was dressed," Mary disparaged him, "in those rough clothes and ugly, heavy shoes." "Well, he's likely breaking sod, and that is why he had oxen. He wouldn't work prince and lady so hard," Laura explained, more to herself than to Mary Power. Everybody's working, Mary remarked. Nobody can have any fun in the summertime. But Nellie Olson is going to ride behind those horses yet, if she possibly can. You know the Olsons' claim is a little way east of the Wilder boys' claims. Have you seen her lately? Laura asked. I never see anybody, Mary answered. All the girls are out on their father's claims, and Cap is teaming every day. Ben Woodworth is working at the depot, and nobody can get a word with Frank Hawthorne nowadays, with Frank Hawthorne nowadays. He works all the time in the store since his father made him a partner. Minnie and Arthur are out with their folks on the homestead, and here I haven't seen you since early April. Well, never mind, we'll see each other all next winter. Besides, I am coming to town to work, if Ma says I may. And Laura told Mary that she expected to sew for Miss Bell. Suddenly she saw that the sun was almost overhead, and she stopped only a moment in the lumberyard office to hear from Mr. McKee that Mrs. McKee and Mattie were getting along all right, though they still missed her. Then she quickly said her goodbye to Mary and hurried away on her walk home. She had stayed in town too long, though she walked so fast that she was almost running. Dinner was ready when she reached home. I am sorry I stayed so long, but so many things happened, she made excuse. Yes, Mother inquired, and Carrie asked, well, what happened? Laura told of meeting Mary Power and seeing Mr. McKee. I visited too long with Mary Power, she confessed. The time went so quickly that I did not know it was so late, and then she told the rest. Miss Bell wants me to work for her in her shop. May I, Ma? Why, Laura, I declare I don't know, Ma exclaimed. You have only just got home. She will pay me 50 cents a day from 7 to 5 o'clock if I bring my own dinner, Laura told them. Well, that is fair enough, said Pa. You take your own dinner, but you get off an hour early. But you came home to be with Mary, Ma objected. I know, Ma, but I will see her every night and morning and all day Sunday, Laura argued. I don't know why, but I feel that I ought to be earning something. Well, that's the way it is once you begin to earn, Pa said. I will be earning $3 a week, said Laura, and seeing Mary too. We'll have lots of time to do things together, won't we, Mary? Yes, and I will do all your housework while you're gone, Mary offered. Then on Sundays we'll have our walks. Well, that reminds me, the new church is done, said Pa. We must all go to church tomorrow morning. I'll be so glad to see the new church. I can hardly believe there is one, Mary said. Well, it's there sure enough, Pa assured her. We'll see for ourselves tomorrow. And the next day, Laura asked. Yes, you may go to work for Miss Bell. You can try it for a while anyway, Ma said. Sunday morning, Pa hitched the horses to the wagon and they all rode to church. It was large and new with long seats that were comfortable to sit in. Mary liked it very much after the small chapel at college, but she knew hardly anyone there. On the way home, she said, there were so many strangers. Well, they come and they go, Pa told her. No sooner do I get acquainted with a newcomer than he sells and the relinquishment of his claim and goes on west, or else his family can't stand it here and he sells out and moves back east. The few that stick are so busy that we don't have time to know each other. Well, it doesn't matter, Mary said. I will soon be going back to college and I know everyone there. After the Sunday dinner, when the work was done, Carrie sat down to read The Youth's Companion. Grace went to play with the kittens in the clean grass near the door. Ma rested in a rocking chair by the open window, and Pa lay down for his Sunday nap. Then Laura said, "Come, Mary, let's go for a walk." They walked across the prairie to the south, and all along their way, the wild June roses were blooming. Mary gathered them until she filled Mary's arm with all she could hold. "Oh, how sweet," Mary kept saying. "I have missed the spring violets, but nothing is sweeter than prairie roses. It is so good to be home again, Laura, even if I can't stay long." We have until the middle of August, said Laura, but the roses won't last that long. Gather ye roses while ye may, Mary began, and she quoted the poem for Laura. Then as they walked on together in the rose-scented warm wind, she talked of her studies in literature. I am planning to write a book someday, she confided. Then she laughed, but I plan to teach school and you're doing that for me, so maybe you will write the book. I write a book? Laura hooted. She said blithely, I'm going to be an old maid school teacher like Miss Wilder. Write your own book. What are you going to write about? But Mary was diverted from the subject of books. She inquired, where's that Wilder? Sorry, that was a little phone call that came through. Where's that Wilder boy that Ma wrote about? It seems he'd be around sometime. Sorry, this may happen a few times. My apologies. I think he's too busy on his claim. Everybody is busy, Laura answered. She did not mention seeing him in town. For some reason that she could not explain, she felt shy about talking about it. She and Mary turned and went rather quietly back to the house, bringing into it the fragrance of the roses they carried. Swiftly that summer went by. Every weekday Laura walked to town in the early morning, carrying her lunch pail. Often Pa walked with her, for he was doing carpenter work on new buildings that newcomers were building. Laura could hear the hammers and saws while she sewed steadily all day long, pausing only to eat her cold lunch at noon. Then, often with Pa, she walked home again. Sometimes there was a pain between her shoulders from bending over her work, but that always disappeared during the walk, and then came the happy evening at home. At supper, she told of all she had seen and heard in Miss Bell's shop. Pa told any news he had gathered, and they all talked of the happenings on the claim and in the house, how the crops were growing, how Ma was getting along with Mary's sewing, how many eggs Grace had found, and that old speckled hen had stolen her nest and just come off with 20 chicks. It was at the supper table that Ma reminded them that tomorrow was the 4th of July. There's timing for you. What are we going to do about it? I don't see that we can do anything, Caroline. Sorry, wrong voice. I don't see that we can do anything, Caroline. Sorry. No way that I know of to prevent tomorrow's being the 4th, Pa teased. Now, Charles, Ma reproached him, smiling. Are we going to the celebration? There was silence around the table. Now, I cannot hear you when we all talk at once, Ma teased in her turn. If we are going, we must think about it tonight. I've been so enjoying having Mary here that I forgot about the 4th, and nothing is prepared for a celebration. Well, my whole vacation is a celebration, and it seems to me enough, Mary said quietly. I have been in town every day. It would be a treat to me to miss a day. Then Laura added, but there are Carrie and Grace. Pa laid down his knife and fork. I'll tell you what, Caroline, you and the girls cook a good dinner, and I'll go to town in the morning and get some candy and fireworks. We'll have our own 4th of July celebration right here at home. What do you say to that? Get lots of candy, Pa, Grace begged, and while Carrie urged, add lots of firecrackers. Everyone had such a good time the next day that they all agreed it was much more fun than going to town. Once or twice, Laura wondered if Almanzo Wilder were in town with the brown horses, and thought of Nellie Olson, and the thought of Nellie Olson just crossed her mind. But if Almanzo wanted to see her again, he knew where she was. It was not her place to do anything about it, and she didn't intend to. All too soon, the summer was gone. In the last week of August, Mary went back to college, leaving an emptiness in the house. Now Pa cut the oats and the wheat with his old hand cradle because the fields were still so small that they would not pay for having a harvester. When the corn was ripe, he cut it and shocked it in the field. He was thin and tired from all the hard work he had done in town and in the fields. He was restless because people were settling the country so thickly. I would like to go west, he told Ma one day. A fellow doesn't have room to breathe here anymore. Oh, Charles, no room with all this great prairie around you, Ma said. I was so tired of being dragged from pillar to post, I thought we were settled here. Well, I guess we are, Caroline. Don't fret. It's just that my wandering foot gets to itching, I guess. Anyway, I haven't won that bet with Uncle Sam yet, and we stay right here till we win it, till I can prove up on this homestead claim. I just want to stop here for a second. Throughout, Laura writes her parents so beautifully throughout the books. You get this wonderful sense of their partnership. There's some formality. There's a sense of formality between them, but there's also this sense of great respect that comes across on the page, and they respect themselves and they respect each other, and that comes across very clearly in the way Laura talks about how she was raised, how she and her sisters do their chores and do their part in the house. It speaks, it speaks very nicely to the way that her mother and father were. And, you can't make that stuff up after the fact. I think that, one, you have to sort of feel that Laura wrote authentically about her parents. Now, there may be those in our audience whose scholarship tells them something different, but I'll just stick with I'd like to believe that Laura has written her parents authentically, because it just feels so nice coming off the page, the way they talk to each other and the way they are together and the way they share this massive responsibility for their family's survival. It's so admirable. So I'm just stopping with that. I think that's a very important component of these books, is how Laura writes her parents. Continuing on. Laura knew how she felt, for she saw the look in his blue. So now Pa was talking about proving up on the homestead. Laura knew how he felt, for she saw the look in his blue eyes as he gazed over the rolling prairie westward from the open door where he stood. He must stay in a settled country for the sake of them all, just as she must teach school again, though she did so hate to be shut into a schoolroom. And that's the end of that chapter. These nice, Garth, very tiny little illustrations, just sort of a marker, a chapter ending, a nice wildflower. And if you haven't seen these in the Garth Williams illustrations, in the more color-driven books, the more involved books, they're nice. They're all through. Breaking the Colts. More wildflowers here. There you go. More wildflowers. And Breaking the Colts. October days had come, and the wild geese were flying south, when once more Pa loaded the furniture on the wagon and they all moved back to town. Other people were moving in from the country, and the seats in the schoolhouse were filling up. Most of the big boys were not coming to school anymore. Some had moved to the claims to stay. Ben Woodworth was working in the depot. Frank Hawthorne was busy in the store, and Cap Garland was working with his team hauling hay and coal or anything he was hired to move in town or country. Still, there were not enough seats in the schoolhouse, for the country was full of newcomers whose children came to school. The smaller pupils were crowded, 3 in a seat. And it was certain now that a larger schoolhouse must be built before next winter. One day when Laura and Carrie came from school, they found company sitting with Ma in the front room. The man was a stranger, but Laura felt that she knew the young woman who looked at her soberly. Ma was smiling. She said nothing for a moment while Laura and the woman looked at each other. Then the woman smiled, and Laura knew her. It was Cousin Alice. Alice, who with Ella and Peter had come to spend Christmas in the log house in the big woods. Alice and Mary had been the big girls then. Ella had been Mary's playmate. Now, while Laura greeted Alice with a kiss, she asked, "Did Ella come too?" "No, she and her husband couldn't come," Alice said. "But here is a cousin you haven't met. met yet, my husband, Arthur Whiting. Arthur was tall, with dark hair and eyes. He was pleasant, and Laura liked him. But though he and Alice stayed a week, he always seemed to be a stranger. Alice was so much like Mary that she belonged in the family, and Laura and Carrie hurried home from school because Alice would be sitting in the sunny front room with Ma. In the evenings, they all popped corn and made taffy, listened to Pa's fiddle, and endlessly talked of old times and plans for the future. Here they are, popping corn and eating taffy. That's nice. Arthur's brother Lee was Ella's husband, and they had taken adjoining claims only 40 miles away. Peter was coming out in the spring. It has been such a long time since we were together in the big woods, and now we are gathering out here on the prairie, Alice said one evening. If only your mother and father would come, Ma said wistfully. I think they will stay in eastern Minnesota, Alice told her. They only came that far, and there they seem contented. It's a queer thing, said Pa. People always moving west. Out here, it's like the edge of the wave when a river's rising. They come and they go, back and forth, but all the time the bulk of them keep moving on west. Alice and Arthur stayed only a week. Early Saturday morning, well wrapped up, with heated flat irons at their feet and hot baked potatoes in their pockets, they set out on their 40-mile sleigh ride home. Give my love to Ella, Laura said as she kissed Alice again for goodbye. It was wonderful sleighing weather, clear and colder than zero, with deep snow and no sign of a blizzard cloud. But this winter there were no more sleighing parties. Perhaps the boys were working their horses too hard all the week. Now and then Laura saw Almanzo and Cap in the distance. They were breaking a pair of Colts to drive and seemed to be having a busy time. On Sunday afternoon, Laura saw them passing several times. Sometimes Almanzo and sometimes Cap was braced in the cutter, holding with all his might to the reins while the wild colts tried to break away and run. Pa looked up from his paper once and said, one of those young fellows will break his neck yet. There's not a man in town that would tackle handling that team. Laura was writing a letter to Mary. She paused and thought how fortunate it was that during the hard winter, Almanzo and Cap had taken chances no one else would take when they had gone after wheat for the starving people. She had finished her letter and folded it when someone knocked at the door. Laura opened it, and Cap Garland stood there. With his flashing grin that lighted his whole face, he asked, Would you like a sleigh ride behind the Colts? Laura's heart sank. She liked Cap, but she did not want him to ask her to go sleigh riding. And all in an instant she thought of Mary Power and of Almanzo, and she did not know what to say. But Cap went on speaking. Wilder asked me to ask you because the Colts won't stand. He'll be by here in a minute to pick you up if you'd like to go. Oh, yes, I would, Laura exclaimed. I'll be ready. Come in. Come in? No, thanks. I'll tell him, Cap replied. Laura hurried, but the Colts were pawing and prancing impatiently when she came. Almanzo was holding them with both hands and said to her, Sorry, I can't help you, as she got herself into the cutter, and as soon as she was seated, they dashed away down the street. No one else was out driving, so the street was clear, and the Colts fought to break away from Almanzo's grip on the lines. Far out on the road south of town, they went racing. Laura sat quietly watching their flying feet and laid-back ears. This was fun. It reminded her of a time long ago when she and Cousin Lena let the black ponies run away across the prairie. The wind blew hard and cold on her face, and bits of snow pelted back onto the robes. Then the Colts tossed their heads and pricked up their ears and let Almanzo turn their frisky steps back towards town. He looked at her curiously. You know, there isn't a man in town except Cap Garland who will ride behind these Colts? He asked. Well, Pa said so, Laura replied. Then why did you come? Almanzo wanted to know. Well, I thought you could drive them, Laura said in surprise, and asked in her turn, but why don't you drive Prince and Lady? Well, I want to sell these Colts, and they got to be broken to drive first, Almanzo explained. Laura said no more as the Colts tried again to run. They were headed toward home and wanted to get there quickly. It took all Almanzo's attention and muscle to hold them to a fast and fighting trot. Main Street flashed by in a blur, and far out on the prairie to the north, Almanzo quieted the Colts and turned them again. Then Laura laughed. If this is breaking them, I'm glad to help. They said little more until an hour had gone by and the winter sun was sinking. Then, as Almanzo held the Colts and Laura quickly slipped out of the cutter at Pa's door, he said, I'll come for you Sunday. The Colts jumped and dashed away before Laura could reply. I'm afraid to have you ride behind those horses, Ma said as Laura came in. Pa looked up from his paper. Now, it does seem like Wilder's trying to get you killed, but I'd say you're enjoying it the way your eyes are shining, he added. After this, Almanzo came on Sunday afternoons to take Laura for a sleigh ride, but he and Cap always drove the Colts first, more than half the afternoon to quiet them, and nothing that Laura could say would persuade Almanzo to let her ride before the Colts were somewhat tired. There was a Christmas tree that year at the new church. Laura and Carrie remembered a Christmas tree long ago in Minnesota, but Grace had never seen one. Laura thought the best part of that Christmas was seeing Grace's delighted face when she looked at the Christmas tree with its lighted candles shining, the bright-colored mosquito bar bags of candy and the presents hanging from its branches. I'm going to stop here for a second. This, probably in our lifetimes, very few of us have probably seen Christmas trees with actual candles lit on them. But this was, of course, the tradition many, many years ago, before there were such a thing as electric lights for trees, which now everybody uses, or most everybody uses. But in those days, people did have little candles, and they would attach the candle holder to a branch, and obviously they couldn't have a ton of candles on a tree, but they did light the candles, and I can only imagine it would have been a beautiful glow of light coming off of a Christmas tree with actual candles lit. It would have been magical. And of course, so much of what Christmas is about, and I love Christmas. Anybody who has known me for a long period of time knows that Christmas is a very special holiday for me, and there are very special traditions of Christmas trees and decorations that go with it for my family, so it's something that's been passed down to me. But Laura says in this last paragraph, the best part of Christmas was seeing Grace's delighted face when she looked at the Christmas tree with its lighted candles. That's so much of what Christmas is about, is seeing the joy in the faces of young people who haven't experienced it before. And the wonderment is something special, and we live on that wonderment for our whole lives. You know, our recollections of the first time, and I have memories of my early Christmases, and to see some version of that experience shared with a young person in my family, whether it was my nephews, niece and nephews, or now grandchildren, Sam and Romy, to see the wonder in their eyes at Christmas time is really special. Catherine and I were just debating yesterday about knowing that this is a myth. I mean, there's so many things that go with Christmas that certainly the Santa myth is a very powerful one, and as children we loved it. But there's always that disappointment that comes when you maybe, and if there are any young people watching here, so maybe I'll just stop right there. But it's a powerful myth, and it's wonderful to see it in the eyes of children. So that's all I'm going to say about this. That's all. Back to the book, and the chapter's almost done. But while Laura, this is talking to Laura now, but while she was waiting for Grace's Christmas doll to be brought to her from the tree, Laura was given a package which surprised her so much that she was sure there was some mistake. It was a small black leather case lined with blue silk. Against the lovely blue shone all white an ivory-backed hairbrush and comb. Laura looked again at the wrapping paper. Her name was plainly written on it, in a handwriting she did not know. I could not swear who gave it to you, Laura, he said, but I can tell you one thing. I saw Almanzo Wilder buying that very case in Bradley's drugstore, and he smiled at Laura's astonishment. And that's the end of that chapter. I think that's so much fun. Thank you all for listening, and hopefully I will see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.